Humanity had always believed that if they worked hard, explored the stars, and tried their best to live peacefully, they would earn a place among the civilizations of the galaxy. For years, humans had helped build stations, repair damaged trade routes, offer medical teams during disasters, and share their inventions with anyone who asked. They had a reputation for being adaptable, emotional, sometimes stubborn, but also reliable. Yet somehow, despite all their efforts, every civilization slowly came to the same conclusion. Humans did not belong with them. Whispers started first. Small groups in different star systems complained that humans grew too fast, learned too quickly, and changed things wherever they went. Some found this impressive. Others found it terrifying. Those who feared them were louder, more political, and always ready to twist stories. A couple of incidents, nothing major. Simple misunderstandings were turned into dramatic warnings about the unpredictable species from the blue world. Real trouble began when a well-known leader from another species claimed that humanity's inventions could someday unbalance the galaxy. No one had proof. But fear doesn't need proof. It only needs someone important to spread it. Soon, other leaders repeated the same message, trying to look wise or protective. They told their people that humans were a risk, that humans might take over, that humans might not fit into the delicate peace the galaxy had worked so hard to maintain. Humans tried to explain. They spoke in meetings, shared data, and promised transparency. They opened research labs for everyone to inspect. They even asked for help understanding what they had done wrong. But each attempt to defend themselves was twisted into something that looked like desperation. To those already convinced that humans were dangerous, every explanation became another reason to distrust them. Then one day, the message came. It was quiet, formal, and cold, delivered through a hologram that floated above the main hall of humanity's central council station. A representative from the Galactic Council stood tall, surrounded by symbols of different civilizations, in a tone without anger or sympathy. The representative said that humanity was to leave all shared star systems within a set amount of time. No appeals. No discussion. The council had voted. The majority had agreed. Humans were banished, not as criminals, not as invaders, but as a species they simply did not want around anymore. Many expected outrage. They expected humanity to fight back, to argue, to shout about unfairness. Some even prepared for a violent reaction, believing humans would never accept such humiliation peacefully. But instead, something unexpected happened. Humanity fell silent. The silence wasn't weakness. It wasn't fear either. It was the silence of people who had been hurt so deeply that words no longer worked. Leaders looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Scientists stood frozen. Workers, travelers, and children didn't speak for hours. It felt like the entire species was holding its breath, waiting for someone to make sense of what had just happened. But no explanation came. Human leaders gathered privately. They reviewed every decision they had made, every treaty they had honored, every alliance they had supported. They found mistakes, of course. No species is perfect, but nothing worthy of banishment. Still, the decision had been made and could not be changed. So humanity did something no one expected. They accepted it, not because they agreed with it, not because they felt guilty, but because arguing with those who didn't want to listen would only deepen the wound. Humanity had always pushed forward, even when the world tried to stop them. This time would be no different. And so, quietly, the migration began. It started with the great ships gathering at the borders of each star system. Families packed their belongings into containers. Traders closed their businesses. Students said goodbye to the schools they had dreamed of attending. Workers looked at stations they had repaired with their own hands, knowing they would never return. There were no protests, no dramatic speeches. Only a steady, determined movement of people preparing to leave. Behind everything they had helped build, the other civilizations watched from a distance. Some felt guilty, but said nothing. Others felt relieved. A few were curious, wondering if humanity would collapse without the support of the galaxy. No one expected the humans to leave quietly, peacefully, almost calmly. They didn't realize that this calmness wasn't surrender. It was resolve. As the ships prepared to depart, the atmosphere inside them was heavy. Children asked why they had to leave. Adults struggled to find simple answers. Older generations stared out the windows at familiar worlds one last time, remembering the years they spent helping build those places. Some of the officers on the evacuation ships wanted to record messages for the Galactic Council, but the central human leadership advised against it. They believed that any message angry or desperate would be used against them. So they stayed silent. People began talking among themselves, sharing stories, memories, and fears. They reminded each other that humanity had been through worse before. Wars, disasters, pandemics, poverty, extinction-level threats. Through every hardship, humans had survived by sticking together, by adapting, by refusing to give up. This was another trial, another test of their strength. One quiet moment repeated many times across the fleet. A person looking up at the stars and whispering, "Where do we go now?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of an entire species. Engineers, scientists, and explorers were gathered to discuss the only path forward. They agreed that turning back was impossible. Staying near the known civilizations would only bring more conflict or humiliation. The only choice was to go further beyond the borders, into the dark regions of space that no one had mapped. The unknown scared many, but it also lit a spark of hope. If they could find a place untouched by politics and prejudice, they could rebuild. They could create something proper, something fair, something uniquely theirs. The final day inside the last shared system felt surreal. Thousands of human ships formed a long line, waiting for clearance to exit. The Galactic Council sent one last announcement, urging humanity to leave peacefully. They did. The ships activated their drives. Bright trails of energy stretched behind them as they moved deeper into the empty regions of space. There were no cheers, no celebrations, only a long, emotional farewell to a galaxy that had refused to understand them. From the observation windows of the leading ships, the charged gates of civilization slowly shrank behind them, becoming tiny glowing points before fading completely. Everyone watched until the final light disappeared, and then humanity was alone. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, countless and silent. Some felt fear, others felt relief, but most felt something different, a quiet strength rising inside them. If no one wanted them, then they would want themselves. If they couldn't belong anywhere, then they would make their own place. As the fleet continued forward, the humans began to talk again. They weren't crying or shouting anymore. They were planning. They were thinking. They were dreaming. A sense of unity began to grow, stronger than it had ever been before. Their pain had pulled them together, and now that unity was turning into purpose, the story of their banishment would not be the end. It would become the beginning of something greater, the seed of a future no one could yet imagine. Humanity, banished by every civilization, was moving into the darkness. But they weren't lost. They were searching, and they believed, deep in their hearts, that somewhere in the vast, endless stars, a new home was waiting for them, a place where they wouldn't just survive, a place where they would finally belong. The human fleet moved deeper into the quiet parts of space, far away from every known border. At first, people thought the silence outside the ship windows would feel peaceful, but it wasn't peaceful at all. It felt heavy, like the whole universe was watching humanity drift with no destination. The stars around them were brighter than anything they had seen before, but they didn't bring comfort. They only reminded everyone how small and alone they really were. Inside the ships, the atmosphere was a mix of tension and hope. Everyone had questions, and almost no one had answers. Children asked why they had to travel so far. Families wondered how long the journey would take, and the leadership tried their best to keep people calm. It wasn't easy. Every person had left behind a life, a home, and memories they never got to thank properly. Even the air inside the ship felt different, heavy with thoughts no one wanted to say out loud. But slowly, as the days turned into weeks, people began talking again. The conversations were not always cheerful, but they helped. People shared their stories of the old star systems, the markets they used to visit, the stations they helped maintain, the small acts of kindness they remembered from strangers of other species. Some stories made them laugh. Some made them tear up. The memories hurt, but they also kept the humans strong. During this time, the leaders gathered in long meetings. They needed to make a decision about the direction of the fleet. There were no maps for this part of space. No guides, no warnings. Just pure darkness and the hope that somewhere, far beyond the edges of known civilization, there was a place where humanity could start again. Scientists studied star patterns day and night, trying to understand which regions might hold planets. Explorers scanned every passing asteroid field for hints of minerals or signs of life. Engineers worked nonstop to make sure the ships didn't fail, because out here, even a small mistake could become a disaster. One day, something changed. Deep scanners picked up a cluster of stars far ahead, arranged in a way no human had ever seen before. It wasn't just one or two stars. It was a whole group, forming a natural circle, almost like a protective ring in the sky. At first, people thought it was a glitch. But when the readings repeated themselves, hope spread through the fleet like fire catching dry grass. Engineers confirmed that the cluster was real. The stars were young but stable, strong enough to support planets with steady light and warmth. No known civilization had ever claimed that region, not because it was dangerous, but simply because no one had bothered to go that far. The humans looked at the readings and felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. The fleet changed direction. As the ships moved closer, the details grew clearer. Several planets circled the larger stars, and many of them were newly formed, still untouched. A few had thin atmospheres forming, and others were covered in ice or rocky plains. To most species, these planets would be dismissed as useless. But to humanity, they looked like opportunity. They looked like life. When the fleet finally arrived near the cluster, people pressed against the viewing windows. The planets weren't beautiful, yet some were rough, cracked, or dark, but there was potential in every corner. Humans had changed harder worlds before. They had survived harsher conditions. If any species could shape these planets into homes, it was them. The leadership held a final meeting in the largest ship, where commanders, scientists, engineers, medics, and workers gathered. The question on the table was simple. Should humanity settle here? The debate lasted hours. Some people were scared to stop moving. They feared that another civilization might still find them and accuse them again. Others argued that humans needed rest, a chance to breathe and rebuild. Many believed the cluster felt like it was waiting for them. In the end, the decision was made. Humanity would choose this place, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. It was new, untouched, and uncontaminated by fear or prejudice. They would give these planets a chance, and in return, they hoped the planets would give them a future. Preparations began immediately. The fleet divided into groups, each assigned to explore a different world. Some groups built temporary camps on moons. Others landed on rocky surfaces and tested soil for nutrients. Teams studied the atmosphere, temperatures, and energy patterns. Every discovery was shared with the entire fleet, creating a sense of teamwork that had been missing for a long time. Life on the planets wasn't easy, not at all. The first world they tried had storms that lasted for days. The second had strange magnetic fields that caused equipment to malfunction. The third was covered in thick mist that made navigation difficult. But humans didn't give up. They adjusted. They adapted. They learned. A breakthrough came when a small exploration group discovered a valley on one of the planets that had all the right elements for life. The soil was rich. The air was thin but breathable with a little support. And underground rivers flowed beneath the surface. The valley wasn't perfect, but it was a place where crops might grow, where buildings could stand, where families could settle without fear. Word spread across the fleet, and people felt something shift inside them. For the first time since being banished, they imagined a home one they could build with their own hands, without looking over their shoulders. They imagined children playing under a sky that belonged to no one else. They imagined farms, schools, markets, and quiet mornings where the pain of banishment slowly faded. Teams landed in the valley and set up the first large habitat domes. The work was difficult, and everyone was tired, but the excitement kept them moving. The domes rose one by one, glowing softly under the planet's early sun. Machines converted soil, drones mapped the terrain, and engineers started designing the framework of the first human settlement in their new realm. Yet even in the middle of progress, there were moments of fear. Some worried that the galaxy might one day return and demand they leave again. Others worried that the unknown dangers of the cluster would be too much. But every time doubt appeared, someone reminded them they had survived banishment. They could survive anything. Every night, people gathered near the viewing panels. They watched the stars and whispered about the future. They talked about how the cluster felt like a gift after so much loss. They talked about how being exiled had forced them to come together, to trust each other more deeply than ever before. They talked about how, even in darkness, humans found a way to chase light out as days turned into weeks. Something beautiful happened. The fleet, once silent and heavy with sadness, began to sound alive again. People laughed more. Workers hummed while building. Children asked excited questions about the new world. Even the older generations, who had seen the worst of banishment, started to smile. Humanity's search, which had once felt hopeless, now felt like a journey that had led them to exactly where they needed to be. Not because the cluster was perfect, but because it gave them a chance to write their own history, not one shaped by fear, but by courage. Slowly, the humans realized something important. They had not just found a place to live. They had found a place to begin again, and deep inside every person, a quiet belief started growing. Maybe the galaxy had banished them, but the stars themselves had welcomed them. The journey was far from over. The challenges were still ahead. But humanity, for the first time in a long time, felt ready. They had found the path. Now they just needed to walk it. When the first human groups began working in the new star cluster, no one knew what their future would look like. They didn't have a grand plan, or a perfect strategy, or a clear idea of how long things would take. What they did know was simple. They had a chance to build something of their own. Something fair. Something peaceful. Something that no other civilization could take away from them. The early days were difficult. Every sunrise on the new planets felt unfamiliar, like a reminder that they were starting from zero. No buildings, no roads, no networks, no old system to fall back on. Everything had to be created by hand and hope. People learned quickly that starting a new life was far harder than fleeing an old one. The first valley they chose for settlement became the heart of their new effort. The air was thin but workable, the soil was promising, and the underground rivers were clean enough to support crops. Even so, nothing worked perfectly on the first try. Machines jammed. Tools broke. The weather changed without warning. Some days were so discouraging that workers just sat outside their domes and stared at the mountains, wondering if they had made the right decision. But humans have always been stubborn. They don't know how to give up easily. Slowly, small groups formed. One team focused on building homes. Another worked on farms. Another handled water systems. Another studied the environment for hidden dangers. People helped each other without thinking twice, because everyone understood the same truth. If one group failed, then everyone failed. In the evenings, workers gathered under the sky. The stars in the cluster were bright and close, almost comforting. People would sit in small circles, sharing dried food packs, talking about their progress, celebrating small victories, and laughing at their mistakes. These conversations brought them closer together, turning a scattered group of exiles into a community. The first real breakthrough happened when engineers managed to create a stable greenhouse using a mix of local soil and nutrient boosters. They planted simple crops, grains, leafy vegetables, and hardy roots. For the longest time, everyone waited nervously. They checked the greenhouse every hour, hoping to see even the smallest sign of life. One morning, a worker opened the greenhouse door and froze. A tiny green sprout pushed up from the soil. It was small, fragile, easy to miss, but to the humans, it looked like a miracle. Word spread through the settlement, so fast that people ran from every direction just to see a little plant. After months of fear and uncertainty, that tiny sprout carried a message. Life could grow here. From that moment, the mood changed. People walked faster, smiled more, and worked with new energy. If one plant could grow, then a farm could grow. If farms grew, then towns could rise. And if towns rose, then humanity could finally say, "This is home." More greenhouses were built. More seeds were planted. Soon, patches of green appeared across the valley like little islands of hope. Humans started building stronger shelters around these farms, first simple metal frames, then larger structures with energy shields to protect them from storms. While food production grew, builders made progress too. The first permanent homes were simple, tightly sealed structures made to withstand wind and dust. But to the people living inside, they felt like palaces. After months of sleeping in cramped ship rooms or temporary domes, having a real home, even a small one, felt like a victory worth celebrating. As the buildings increased, so did the number of problems. The planet had strange weather patterns. Winds could shift from calm to violent in minutes. The ground sometimes released harmless gases that made equipment sensors behave strangely. There were days when people felt exhausted from constant repairs and adjustments, but each problem taught them something new. Scientists worked day and night studying the planet's climate, mapping wind routes, measuring underground pressure, and discovering how the land responded to human activity. Every new piece of information helped make the settlement safer. They discovered that the mountains around the valley acted like natural shields, blocking the harshest storms. They learned how to predict wind patterns, which helped them position buildings more safely. They even found minerals in the rocks that could be used to create glass, tools, and energy circuits. With every discovery, humanity grew more confident. One of the most important moments came when the first water pipeline was tested. For weeks, engineers dug, drilled, and traced a path from the underground river to the settlement. The people held their breath as the system activated. When clean water flowed through the pipes into the tanks, cheers erupted from every corner. That night, no one slept early. They held a quiet celebration, sharing stories and sitting by portable heaters, laughing like a community that knew it had just secured its future. More pipelines followed, then energy grids, then communication towers linking the entire valley. Soon, the settlement wasn't just surviving. It was growing, Other planets in the cluster saw similar progress. Some groups built floating platforms on icy oceans. Others carved shelters into rock cliffs. A few ventured into thick forests and mapped entire regions. Every world offered new challenges, but humans met each one with the same determination. As months passed, the once quiet valley turned into a busy place filled with movement, voices, and hope. Transport vehicles rolled across the land, carrying tools and supplies. Children played outside the domes, chasing each other across safe areas marked by bright flags. Adults taught them about the stars, the cluster, and the importance of unity. They wanted the next generation to grow up believing this place was not a punishment, but a gift. The real turning point came when the first large council hall was built. It wasn't fancy, just a strong building made of local stone and reinforced metal, but it symbolized something important. Humans now had a place to make decisions together, to plan their future as a united people instead of a scattered group. Inside that hall, leaders announced the name of their new society. They didn't choose something dramatic or arrogant. Instead, they chose a simple idea that captured everything they had been through. A realm built by exiles, for exiles rising from pain, but aimed toward peace. The announcement spread across the cluster. People felt pride, not sadness. They were no longer running. They were building. And the worlds they had discovered weren't just temporary shelters. They were home. Even so, there were moments of reflection. At night, many still looked up at the stars, wondering what the old civilizations were doing. Did they ever think about humans? Did they regret their decision? Would they ever seek contact again? Some hoped for that. Others feared it. But most people understood that worrying about the past would only slow them down. They were creating something new here, something powerful enough to stand on its own. The more they built, the more they realized that the cluster didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like destiny, as if the stars had been waiting for them all along. Humanity had been cast out of every civilization they once tried to help. But here, in the quiet space where no one expected anything from them, they discovered their true strength. Not in war, not in politics, not in technology alone, but in unity. That unity turned barren ground into farms, silence into community, strangers into neighbors, and fear into purpose. What began as an exile was slowly becoming a rebirth. And deep inside every heart, one thought remained clear. The galaxy might have pushed them away, but this future, was theirs to build. Life in the new human realm slowly began to feel normal, almost peaceful, but peace never lasts forever. Even though people were busy building farms, homes, energy lines, schools, and research centers, everyone understood that they were still in the early stages of a long journey. They had survived banishment, survived loneliness, survived the shock of starting over, but now came a different kind of challenge, protecting what they had built. Months passed, and the settlements grew. What was once quiet land filled with dust and wind now echoed with laughter, machinery, and excited voices. The valley that became the heart of their new world turned into a thriving town. Children ran along the safe paths. Workers repaired vehicles or carried construction beams from one area to another. Scientists studied samples of strange minerals they found in the hills. Farmers checked their greenhouses every morning, proud of the food that came from their own hands. Even with all the progress, people still remembered why they were here. The pain of being pushed out of every star system still lived inside them. Some hid it well. Others carried it openly. But everyone shared the same desire, not revenge, not anger, but the simple wish to never feel helpless again. To make sure of that, humans decided they needed stability. Real stability. The kind that came from planning ahead, not reacting to problems as they happened. So the leaders of every settlement gathered in the new council hall. a building now larger, stronger, and filled with people who had spent months shaping this realm with their bare hands. The meeting lasted for hours. They talked about laws, safety plans, trade between settlements, medical support, and long-term survival. Everyone listened carefully. People no longer thought like individuals from many nations scattered across Earth. Now they thought as one united group. Their identity had changed. They were not just humans anymore. They were the founders of a new civilization. That one of the biggest discussions was about security, not weapons, not armies, but simple protection. Out here, the dangers were not from the old civilizations, but from nature itself. Strange weather, unstable terrain, unknown life forms that might appear someday. No one wanted to be caught unprepared. So teams were formed to map the entire valley and its surroundings. Others were assigned to scan deeper into the cluster to make sure no unexpected threats were hiding nearby. Humans had learned from their past. They didn't want to build blindly. They wanted to build smart. In the following weeks, new programs started. Survey groups left early each morning with drones and scanners, traveling across mountains, forests, caves, and wide plains. Every discovery, big or small, was noted and shared with the entire settlement, so everyone stayed informed. Most days were calm. But one day, something unusual happened. A survey group exploring the far edges of the valley came across a strange patch of land where the soil was discolored. It wasn't harmful, and it wasn't life-threatening, but it reacted strangely to touch. It vibrated slightly, like it was responding to movement. Scientists examined samples and discovered tiny particles inside the soil that didn't belong to the planet's natural makeup. The discovery raised questions. How did those particles get there? What caused the reaction? Was it something buried deep underground? The entire settlement buzzed with curiosity. People weren't afraid, if anything. They felt excited. It reminded them that the universe was still full of mysteries waiting to be explored. Humanity had always loved discoveries, and even here in exile, their love for learning hadn't disappeared. After a few days of study, the scientists discovered that the unusual soil came from a rare mineral layer deep beneath the planet's surface. The planet wasn't dangerous. It was rich in resources waiting to be used. This discovery changed everything. Suddenly, the settlement had access to materials that could help build stronger tools, better buildings, and more advanced machines. The good news spread across the cluster. Other planets also showed signs of unique resources. One world had crystals that stored energy naturally. Another had lightweight stone perfect for construction. Another had metallic sand that could be melted into strong, flexible frames. Humans recognized the pattern. The cluster was not just a random place. It was a treasure of possibilities. But even with all the excitement, there were challenges. As new settlements expanded, communication became more complicated. Messages took longer to travel. Supplies had to be organized more carefully. Some people lived close to the main valley, while others lived far away in places where storms could cut off travel for days. This forced the council to think bigger. They realized they needed a system that connected every settlement in the cluster, a network that kept everyone informed, united, and safe. The solution was simple but brilliant. Engineers began building communication towers across the cluster, each one connected to a powerful central hub. These towers would allow instant updates, emergency signals, and shared resources. It was like creating a nervous system for their entire new society. While the towers were being built, people began noticing something important. Humans no longer moved like exiles. They no longer acted like guests in someone else's home. They were building with confidence, planning like founders, dreaming like people who finally believed they deserved a future. Even the children grew up with a different mindset. They didn't learn about living under someone else's rules or begging for acceptance. They learned about exploring, building, caring for their land, and trusting their community. They walked with confidence, not fear. But even as life grew better, people still wondered about the galaxy beyond the cluster. No one had heard anything in months. No messages, no warnings, no threats. It was quiet. Too quiet. Some believed the galaxy had forgotten humans. Others thought they were being watched from far away. But most people simply didn't care anymore. They had learned to focus on their own growth rather than worrying about a world that had pushed them aside. Still, to stay safe, humans created a monitoring system that scanned the edge of the cluster daily. Not to prepare for war, just to have awareness. If any civilization tried to approach, humans wanted to know immediately. Knowledge was their shield now. As the settlements continued to grow, something unexpected happened. A group of explorers found an area where the sky glowed faintly at night, unlike any other part of the cluster. The light wasn't dangerous. It was beautiful. A soft blue shimmer, like the sky itself, was breathing gently. The explorers studied it and discovered it was caused by a unique form of naturally charged particles. The glow came from the particles interacting with the planet's magnetic field. It wasn't harmful, but it created a peaceful, dreamlike atmosphere. People named it the Blue Rise, and soon it became a place families visited to watch the sky together. It brought comfort, a reminder that beauty still existed even after everything humanity had lost. The Blue Rise became a symbol of hope. It reminded everyone that their new world wasn't just a place to survive. It was a place to live, to dream, to grow. With every passing month, humanity grew stronger. Their homes became sturdier. Their farms became bigger. Their technology improved using materials from the cluster. Their children grew healthier, happier, and smarter. Their unity became unbreakable. The galaxy had banished them, but the stars had embraced them for the first time in many generations. Humans felt a sense of pride not based on what others thought of them, but on what they had built with their own hands. They were creating a realm that would one day be known not as a refuge, but as a civilization in its own right. A place born from pain but shaped by determination. A place that did not fear the galaxy, but one day the galaxy would fear losing. And deep in their hearts, everyone knew one truth. The journey was far from over. The real story was just beginning. The moment the first message from the wider galaxy reached the human realm, many people expected it to sound angry or mocking. After all, humanity had been pushed away, insulted, and treated as outsiders for so long. But the message was surprisingly calm. It simply said that a large delegation from multiple civilizations wished to visit the human realm and see for themselves what had been built in exile. Most humans did not trust this sudden politeness. For decades, they had heard only fear, warning, and rejection from the galaxy. But now, after seeing the rising power and rapid progress of the human realm among the stars, the same civilizations wanted to reconnect. People whispered that it was too sudden, too convenient, too clean. Still, the Human Council agreed to receive them, not out of weakness, but because the people felt confident. They had built their own world from nothing: ships, stations, cities, cultures, new knowledge, and new unity. They no longer felt desperate to prove anything to anyone. The delegation arrived in a massive ship shaped like a silver crescent. It dropped out of warp near the outer border station, where hundreds of humans watched from observation decks. The visiting ship slowed down gracefully, its lights shimmering over the metal surface like floating dust. When the airlocks connected, a silence fell across the chamber. For many humans, this was the first time they had seen aliens up close since their exile. Tall figures stepped out first, wearing long robes that looked like flowing glass. Another species followed with skin like dark stone. A third group of small, glowing beings floated rather than walked. And behind them came others, all appearing peaceful and careful. The moment they stepped into the station, The visitors looked around in visible surprise. The place was clean, bright, and organized. There were gardens with real plants, long transparent walkways, and soft lighting that made everything look calm but alive. It was nothing like the rough frontier world they had expected. Their eyes moved from the polished shields on the walls to the smooth white floors. What shocked them most was the atmosphere. Humans moved through the halls at their own pace, talking, laughing, working. They weren't defensive. They weren't tense. They weren't angry. They simply treated the visitors like any other guests. The leader of the visitors, a tall figure with ridges across the forehead, whispered something to his translator. The translator blinked, confused at first, then translated the murmured words. This was not what we expected. The human representative, a calm, older woman with a steady voice, welcomed them politely. This realm was built with our own hands. We did not know if anyone would ever come, but we decided to build something worthy anyway. The visitors walked through the station, escorted gently but respectfully. Along the way, they saw humans repairing massive solar rings, adjusting shield generators, and transporting scientific equipment. They saw families eating together, children learning in glass classrooms, and workers resting in small gardens filled with soft blue lights. Even the sound of distant music echoed from some corner. The visitors stopped several times, struggling to hide their astonishment. They had heard stories that humanity was wild, unpredictable, and dangerous. But what they saw here felt balanced and peaceful, but strong at the core like a calm river that could become a storm if needed, eventually. They were invited to visit the heart of the human realm, a capital station built inside a massive ring-shaped structure. Entering the central dome, the visitors were almost speechless. It was vast, so wide that they could barely see the opposite side. And in the center stood a tall pillar of glowing energy, surrounded by circular floors that rotated slowly. Humans called this place the Arc Hall. The visitors looked up at the endless ceiling of stars projected across the dome. A few of them quietly admitted they had never seen anything so beautiful in their own civilizations. The human representative walked beside them and spoke softly. When the galaxy pushed us away, we could have become bitter. We could have become hostile. But instead, we decided to grow inward first, to strengthen ourselves, to become something the galaxy could not ignore, but would no longer fear. The leader of the visitors looked at her carefully. You say this with calm, but we sense something else beneath your voice. She smiled gently. Strength, not anger. Strength that doesn't need to shout. The visitors exchanged looks. They had expected humans to crave validation or demand apologies. But so far, there had been no push for revenge or recognition. Instead, humanity seemed far more interested in building their own future. Later that evening, the visitors were given a tour of one of the human research centers. They walked through transparent corridors overlooking bright laboratories. Scientists were studying new forms of energy, new materials, and new propulsion systems. They were calm, focused, working with quiet excitement. One visitor asked, "Why do you work so hard?" "You already have enough to live comfortably." A young technician paused before answering. "Because the day we stop growing is the day we become weak. Not weak in war, but weak in spirit." That simple sentence left a deep impact throughout the tour. The visitors noticed something even more surprising. Humanity had created a society where different groups actually stood together. There were disagreements and debates, yes, but there was a consciousness that unity mattered. The harsh lessons from exile had shaped them. The next day, the delegation attended a gathering at the Arc Hall. Representatives from every human sector joined. Instead of giving speeches of pride or superiority, the humans listened. They asked the visitors questions about trade, knowledge, and peace. They showed interest, but they made it clear that they would not give up their independence or their realm not. At one point, a small glowing being asked, "Do you wish to rejoin the galaxy?" There was a quiet pause. The human representative answered with gentle firmness, "We wish to stand beside anyone who respects us, but we will not return to a role where we are judged before we speak." The visitors nodded slowly, some with respect, others with shame. Finally, on the last day of their visit, the delegation stood on a high balcony overlooking the human capital. The stars shimmered across the sky, and far below, people moved through bright streets, working, laughing, building. The leader of the visitors turned to the humans. "We pushed you away. We feared your ambition. We feared your unpredictability. But everything we feared helped shape you into something even stronger." The human representative smiled lightly. "Sometimes being pushed out forces you to build better things." The leader bowed his head slightly. "We hope we can begin a new chapter, one defined not by fear, but by respect." Humanity agreed, but gently reminded them that respect had to be earned, not requested. The galaxy nodded again, understanding. When the delegation finally departed, the humans watched their ship rise slowly into the sky. No one cheered. No one clapped. They simply watched with quiet confidence. Because this time, they weren't waiting for approval. They weren't hoping for acceptance. They had built their own destiny. As the ship disappeared among the stars, a calm voice echoed inside the Ark Hall. "We were banished once. We were pushed away by every civilization. But we did not break. We built our own realm among the stars, and now the galaxy sees us as we truly are." People around her nodded. There was no anger in their eyes, only strength. A young worker standing nearby whispered to a friend, "Do you think the galaxy will treat us differently now?" His friend replied, "Maybe. But even if they don't, we're not the same people we were before. And that's enough." In the weeks that followed, the human realm received more messages. Some asked for peaceful cooperation. Some wanted scientific exchange. Others simply expressed curiosity. Humanity answered each message calmly, carefully, wisely. They had learned that trust could not be built overnight. It grew like a seed, slow and steady. But they were no longer outsiders begging for a place. They were equals, not because they demanded it, but because they had earned it. From that point forward, the human realm became known throughout the galaxy, not as exiles, not as wanderers, and not as threats. Instead, they were recognized as builders of strength, makers of unity, and keepers of quiet courage. Humanity had created their own place among the stars. And this time, no one had the power to take it away.